Okay, so what I thought I would do for you today is explain to you how I go about creating a piece like this. If you want to know about how I've made this snake, which is made from precious metal clay, I think I'll make another separate video about it, but I want to talk about the beading today. As you can see from this piece, it's not symmetrical, although it has a symmetry to it. It's more about the rhythm of the piece, the way the colours work together, the way the shapes work together. This is quite intricate, and there's a lot of putting beads on and taking them off, and I'm a firm believer that you can only really see how the beads are going to work together once they're strung. Many people use beading boards, which is a board with a little sort of curved groove in it, and then you place the beads to see what they would look like. I personally haven't found that as useful as simply threading things on and then taking them off. The piece I'm making today is a little bit more symmetrical than this piece, but it still has roughly the same sort of method. So this is a commission for a friend whose sister is called Amber. She helped me choose this piece, which I've already bound. We thought it looked like a beautiful drop of honey. If you want to see about how I do this kind of binding, then I can make another video about that. But for now, that's been done in preparation. And as you can see, I've laid out some amber beads, which are what are called the accent beads. These are the main sort of core of the design, if you like. And I've placed them roughly where I think they might look nice. So what I would simply do is begin threading, and I thread and unthread, and I work from both ends of the piece. So I begin by putting this piece on. When I'm beading, what I've discovered is it's important to have something for this to hang from and to be held by. So on this piece, that loop is held in place by these two copper beads on either side of it. I don't know if you can see that properly. So what I'm going to do on here is place some bone beads. But before I do that, I'm going to explain to you what this is. So I heard another beader, someone who's obsessed with beads as I am, call this bead soup. My studio is absolutely full of bowls of beads, different little selections all separated out. You become a big collector of bowls if you work this way. So what I've got in here is I've thought about the colours and textures and shapes that I would like in this piece, and I've literally just chucked them into a bowl together to see how they look. Looking at this, I think they need a little bit more highlight, so I'm going to just take some beads from my bowl of white beads. These are bone, and I collect a lot of my beads from old pieces, either broken pieces that people don't want anymore, or from charity shops or second-hand stores. I have a wonderful market where I live. So I'll just put that in there and see how those colours come up combined. I've got quite a lot of the bronzite in here, which is quite dark. I don't think I'm going to be using as much as that because I would like this to be a light piece to echo the lightness of the amber. So I won't be using all of them, but I've got them all in here because they're all quite different shapes, and I want to be able to pick the exact shape that I want when I'm ready to bead them on. So a better idea of the sort of colour combination would be to take a few of those out and then have a look at what we've got, and bearing in mind that we've got the real brightness of the amber here. So other beads that are in here, these are some very nice pieces of orangey agate, which go very nice with the amber. Bone beads, and these tiny little brass beads, which I actually got from a top that I bought from a charity shop that had lots of this sequiny stuff on one shoulder. It was like armour on one shoulder. It didn't, the top didn't work. I tried to change it at close walk with other people. Nobody wanted it because it didn't really work. So I took it apart, and I actually got quite a lot of beads out of that. So I have a whole pot of them here. I'm just going to put a few more in in the bead soup. You can tell I've been reading too many fairy stories. Excuse my dirty hands, I've been doing a pottery class with the amazing Tati Dennehy this morning. She's also on Instagram, so if you want to have a look at her work, she makes beautiful clay goddess figures. So what I'm doing here is just putting a few beads on here to see how it sits, to see how that would sit in there. And it actually sits between them, so I'm going to have 4 on here, I think. It's a kind of framing, we've got a kind of framing there. And when it's tight, the question is, will that sit in the middle and will it stay there, or will it keep slopping to the side? And it's looking to me like it's probably going to slop to the side, so I'm going to put something else on there to hold it. The question is, at this point, what's going to work best? Is it going to be a couple of these brassy beads? The hole's fairly big in this, so they're possibly going to get lost underneath, or is it going to work better with one of these on either side, which is going to hold it in place? But what's it going to look like, you know, size wise, proportion wise? And sometimes the only way you can tell is by adding a few more beads from your design. Oops, and then seeing how you feel about it, whether it looks right to you. So I'm going to add another couple of tiny bone beads on here. See how that looks to me. Also, what I quite often think about when I'm designing a piece like this is movement. You know, how it's going to hang. Is this going to be able to move? Or if I put these on here, is this going to be really stiff and kind of seem uncomfortable? Very precious copper beads, which I have a few more of. Might look better holding it in place. Now these came from a necklace that I broke down. It's actually quite a cheap looking necklace, but I realised as soon as I picked it up that the majority of the beads on it were little copper beads. These are made in Africa. I believe they're made by hand. They're tiny, tiny, tiny little copper beads. Now this necklace was very dull when I got it, so the copper needs shining up. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm shining it up on just a little piece of sandpaper, basically. Because copper can get dull very quickly. On my skin it actually stays very shiny, something to do with the chemistry of my body. But on different people's skin it reacts very differently, which is one of the things I absolutely love about copper. Because it's so sensitive to its environment, it takes forming very well because it's very malleable. And it's such a warm, beautiful colour. So I'm going to try that out. Now that's going to hold it in place, and it also looks quite nice. It looks like a continuation of the design. So what I'm going to do here is a couple of bone beads on either end. It's interesting I've been asked to work on this piece now, because I've been doing quite a lot of thinking about Brisingamen, which is Freya's necklace, which has amber on it. And there's a lot of debate about that story actually, because sometimes the way it's told is that Freya went down and did lewd things with the dwarfs because she was so besotted with Brisingamen the necklace, and that this was a weakness on her part. But my partner and some friends of mine have been discussing this story and whether some of the meaning of it has been lost, especially in our new modern attitudes to sex. And you know, what did it really mean for Freya, the goddess of love, to go down and make love with the dwarfs to receive Brisingamen the necklace? And what does Brisingamen symbolise? And quite obviously, amber is incredibly beautiful, beautiful like the sun. And she has travelled down into the darkness and made love with some creatures from down there in the darkness to acquire this special necklace. And myself being the way that I am, my attitude towards jewellery and jewellery making and jewellery wearing, I think that sometimes jewellery is a lot more symbolic than just a frivolous thing that we use to decorate ourselves, although it can be that too. So in that sense, amber has some symbolism connected to Norse mythology. If you have any thoughts about Freya and that story, I would absolutely love to hear them. Now that's looking good, isn't it? That's looking like quite rhythmic. So what I've also got in here is I've got tiny white beads, but I've also got larger ones so that I can create rhythm, you know, a largeness and a smallness, a largeness and a smallness in the piece without necessarily having to put colour in at that point if I think there's, you know, going to be an overload of colour. This design is quite simple. It's got very few different colours on it, so the rhythm's actually in some ways more important because it makes it a much more interesting piece if it has more variety in shape when it has less variety in colour. Let's see if you can see that. So I'm just going to go on here adding a few more of these. Now I've already done a little experiment and threaded these larger amber beads on, and I like the size of them next to this piece, but what I realise is if I copy what I've done here and just put 3 of these little brassy beads and then put the large one, then the jump from these tiny ones to this large one seems far too extreme, which is where the bronzite comes in, because I can use, if I get just the right kind of thickness and size, so slightly bigger than the brass ones but slightly smaller than the amber, put that on there, put the larger amber on, and then it gets more of a sense of it's growing to this. Oh, I don't like the way that's sitting on there. I'm going to turn this one around because it's slightly flatter on this side, and then hopefully the 2 beads will sit a bit more comfortably next to one another. I don't feel like that's working, so again, you know, if you're not happy with what's happening, you can just take it off, choose a different bead, put that one on again. And another thing is sometimes you don't know how it's going to look until you've continued all the way around, or till you've done the echoing on the other side. Now I can have a rough sort of look and consider whether these are too big, whether they're dominating this or not. But again, sometimes you can't tell until you've added more pieces, and you can bring that back in balance at times with other things that you're doing. So I think I'm going to echo this getting larger and getting smaller, but I don't have many more of those large beads. This is one of the things that I come across with working with secondhand beads, is I can't just, you know, if I start a design and I run out of the kind of bead, then that's just how it is. And it seems as my ethos is not to order new beads or to only do it as little as possible, and I want to stick very closely to that ethos. Sometimes I just have to do what I can with what I have, and sometimes that can make for more interesting designs. It pushes my creative boundaries because I can't always just do the first thing that I thought of. It encourages me to be more of a magpie than I already was as well, constantly hunting for treasure in the charity shops. Now if you see, now that I've added this one on, it's kind of balancing out the largeness of that. It doesn't seem so extreme now. So I'm going to add the echo of that one onto the other side. Absolutely lovely working with amber. As you can possibly see, there's a light coming from the window over there, and when the sun is very, very bright at the perfect time in the afternoon, it's absolutely beautiful. When it shines in through here and through the amber, it can sometimes make my work quite difficult to see, but I really relish that. The beauty of the amber being shone upon by the sun gives me a lot of joy. And that's another sort of symbolism that I have with amber, is that it reminds us how to create beauty from pain. It's called The Tears of the Tree in one of her songs and in many of her books, of Carolyn Hillier, who is a woman doing lots of women's workshops and amazing life-size paintings of old grandmother Udigans, as she calls them, or witches. She works from her farm on Dartmoor, making music, paintings and running workshops. And she calls amber the tears of the tree, which I think is beautiful imagery. And obviously amber is associated very strongly with memory. Scientists can glean stuff from the past, from things caught in amber. So literally it contains very, very deep memory. I consider amber to have seen a lot beyond and before the evolution of modern humans. So to me, it has the wisdom of the tree, the compassion of tears, and it remembers. And there's always that idea that when someone gets very, very old and they've seen and watched the patterns of human life for a very, very long time, you just instinctively develop compassion because you can see the way that humans develop, you know, our pain, our joys, our kindnesses, our unkindnesses, how we develop, how we grow. And human psychology has gone a very, very long way in the times that amber would have seen. And I consider it a material that helps us understand how to make beauty from pain, because if amber are the tears of the tree, and they can be so beautiful, that's a perfect expression of compassion as far as I'm concerned. Okay, so I stopped recording then for a moment because there's quite a lot of putting on and taking off, and you know, just trying to get it just right so that I'm happy with the rhythm of it. And I think putting those large ones on, and as you might be able to see, I've also added bonsai on either side of those, so it's much more similar to this. I'm gonna continue adding beads. And what I do with these, I tend to do a more simple bit around the neck, because beads like this can be very uncomfortable around the neck, and it will also sit much nicer. So this piece goes around the back, and then the more sort of complicated design hangs around at the front. So I'm gonna begin to simplify this in a moment. What I really like about these little brassy discs is they're just cut very roughly, and that means that sometimes they sit flush to one another, and at other times they have little gaps, and so they have a kind of more randomness to them, a kind of ruggedness, which is, if you've seen more of my work, which I'm guessing you have, it's something I really, really like to see in pieces. I think really to finish this off we might need just perhaps another little bit of yellow. Maybe this is the time to bring in these little agates, perhaps. So what you can see here is I'm reducing the size as I'm going round to the side, but keeping the kind of pattern. What I'm using here is a kind of beading wire, which I don't very often use actually. I mostly work with natural threads, mostly hand-spun natural threads, linen and nettle and hemp. But the reason I'm using this beading wire today is because these little tiny brassy beads have quite sharp edges, and ultimately if it was a natural thread inside the necklace, then they would cut it and eventually it would break. This is a beading wire that has separate wires inside it that are tied up, so it has a kind of nice flexibility, which means that pieces hang nicely. That's important to me as well, the shape hanging nicely. What I'm going to do is start reducing the size now. I'm not going to put any more bronzite on because the dark has been here and here, and there's a big space here, so I'm not going to put more dark here. I'm just going to go to light. And I'm having a think about whether or not I'm going to put another one of these on before I start really simplifying, and I don't think I am. This one's going incredibly well actually, especially considering I'm filming, because quite often I thread things and then I unthread them because I'm not happy with them. And that really is part of the process. It's a very artistic process. You know, you can't always tell until things are properly hung, you know, how they're going to look, as I've said. So what's kind of happening here is kind of trailing off, if you like. You know, we've got pattern and shape here, and then what I want to do to go around the back is trail off with the design and simplify. Sometimes what I find is that actually stringing something up and then leaving it overnight and coming back to it is the best thing, because what I'm seeing here is I might like to swap that one with that one, or you know. So because of that unsureness, I'm going to thread a few more of the bone beads on so that I can get a better sense of what the finished design might look like. And then actually I'm just going to leave this to sit, see how those pieces want to settle together, and how happy they are. I'll just show you here. This is the trailing off. Again, what's happening here is a kind of trailing off. So there's the design here, and then the beads start to get smaller and smaller and smaller until they then go into this pattern here, which isn't actually a pattern. It's the colours of the beads and sides of the beads pretty much spread with a black bead on either side, but it isn't actually a pattern. There you go. I hope you learned something from this video and you enjoyed it. If you have anything to say about amber and what it means to you, if you have any insights about that Freya story, or if you have any questions, then please don't fail to put a comment if you want to. Thank you.